Well, welcome to the latest edition of Broadcast Booth Stories from inside the headsets of Play-by-Play. I'm Brian Jensen, the host of the show, and man, I tell you this every time we have an episode, but this time I think it ranks supreme. I'm really excited about the guests that we have today. When I started in broadcasting coming out of college, I'd done a JV game, on the radio. Kind of really got me intrigued with play-by-play. Was fortunate enough to do a little bit when I was in Beaumont, Texas, in television there, Lamar basketball, some football play-by-play, Beaumont Golden Gator baseball. Then got to Dallas in television, did a little bit of SMU on the side, and then got the great opportunity to do Texas Tech football for the past 20 seasons. I tell you that because all of that time, there was one guy that I listened to religiously on the weekends, and it was Brad Sham, the play-by-play host, the play-by-play voice of the Dallas Cowboys. I listened to him for a lot of reasons, but number one on the list for me was the fact that he was the ultimate pro, and he was the guy that, in my opinion, described what was going on the field and everywhere around the stadium better than anybody in the business. And I'm so thrilled to welcome Brad Sham to Broadcast Booth. Howdy, Brad.
Hey, Brian. Thank you very much for those very kind words. Check will be arriving shortly. And it's great to be with you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll tell you, the other thing that I think is pretty cool about what's going on these days, not only are you the play-by-play voice of the Cowboys, have been for over 40 years now, but let's see, podcasts, books, interviews, just about ever. You may be the most interviewed person in the NFL these days, it seems like to me.
Well, I don't know about that, but, when you look, my late father, who was an optometrist, his job brought him to Dallas from Chicago in the summer of 1970 when I was in the Army, filling out a National Guard active duty stint. Now, had that not happened, you and I wouldn't, in all likelihood, be talking today. The fact that I happened to wind up doing this job around and with and for the Dallas Cowboys, that's had, I think, much more to do. I'm not saying I don't work hard, and I try to take pride in what I do. I mean, you and I have that in common, and everybody in the business does. We all try to do the best we can all the time. We have our standards, but it's none of my doing that I wound up in Dallas, and that, I think, has a lot to do with the attention that one gets. And then when you stick around a while, then, pretty soon people look around and say, wait, that old guy's the only one who remembers that. Let's ask him.
Well, sticking around a while is one thing. Sticking around a while and doing it as well as you've done it for all these years is quite another. There have been quite a few, acknowledgments for you, Brad, awards, those types of things. Where does the naming of the booth at AT&T fit in that list? Well,
it's probably at the top, and it's surreal. That was a wonderful moment, and one of the great blessings was that my mother, who's at the bottom left of the screen, who we lost 2 years ago now, was still there to see that. That I had no idea that was coming, because that's not anything that you have a right to or ought to expect. And usually for anything that nice to happen, you have to be dead. So and someday I'll be dead, but I'm not yet. It's like the night in Monty Python. We're not dead yet. And it was, it's an incredible honor. There isn't anything else that club can do more than that to honor someone like me. So it was tremendous.
I think there was one thing that was pretty cool right around that time, too, is something that your brother did for you with this jersey that I was able to sneak a peek of on the internet with
Yeah.
all the signatures of your great team.
Yes, that was he actually did a couple of things for me when I turned 72 years ago. He showed up in Hawaii. We were playing. My mother used to say, "Who are you playing this week?" And I said, "There it is." I said, "Mom, I'm not playing anybody. They're playing the Bengals." So, but he, on the occasion, I'm not putting on a helmet. You would never let me play. So when on the occasion of my 70th birthday, my brother showed up in Hawaii for that exhibition game, and I'm old enough I can still call them exhibition games, and that was pretty cool. But that first one that he gave me that for, I think, my birthday on the it could have been my birthday because the booth naming was later, but maybe it was for the holidays. But the cool part was what you pointed out, Brian. He had everybody on our crew sign it, and I'm just tremendously proud to be a part of that team. It's not just Babe, who you see next to me there, but Christy Scales, our phenomenal sideline reporter, who's been more than 25 years on the broadcast in various capacities. And in the last picture, the guy on the far left, Bob Thomas, my statistician, he's been with me the longest, going back to the days. There's Bob on the far left, and he started with me when I think just after Vern left the Cowboys radio booth. So that we're all a family. We really are. Our producer Dan Miles, who's been around forever, and the spotters have changed, but they've been with us for a long time. We're very much a team. And that is the thing that I think I am proudest of. Every now and then in the before times, perhaps it'll happen again someday when we could have guests in the booth. I like to show off our team to my friends and people I care about, because it's very much like what the late, great Ron Chapman, the great Dallas radio personality, used to describe as a duck swimming. You know, you look at the duck and he's placid and gliding effortlessly, but beneath the surface, those little webbed feet are kicking like hell. And that is what's going on. And you know it. You've done it. That's what happens in a booth. And the great thing is that the public is never supposed to see that. The public's not supposed to ever be aware of it. And that can only happen when everyone is functioning at a real high rate of efficiency and in tune with each other. And we are, and we have been for a long time. That is probably the most meaningful thing to me.
Yeah, that's such a great point. You know, as I mentioned, I've only been doing the Texas Tech broadcast for 20 seasons, and every one of those seasons has been with producer engineer Steve Pitts, and he has just been a rock that has allowed us, you know, many times people don't realize behind the scenes, you know, what could go wrong. I mean, now it's not like a satellite truck rolling up, you know, with the huge semis that ESPN and the television guys roll in with, you know, hundreds of people. But at the same time, it's pieces of technology. It's plugging into things that have to work, and if they don't, figuring out why it's not working. And then, you know, there are times when, I don't know about you, but there are times when I might have a cold or something might be going on, and man, I need him to kind of help me out there with a couple of times he's going to have to tweak the mic or help me out with, you know, what I'm hearing, etc. It's a team thing.
There's no question. And then, you know, we have a different. You and I have both been in this business long enough that we have done all the jobs. So there have been times when I have, and I know you've done it too. You're everything. You are the producer and the engineer, and you're carrying the equipment, and you're doing the announcing, and you're the whole thing. And then on the professional ranks in professional sports, so we've got an engineer who is in charge of the technical stuff, and a producer who is in charge of getting the commercials in and contact with home base and the good ones in both of those jobs. And I've been really fortunate to be associated with really good ones. The good ones have the ability to put out a roaring fire without you ever feeling an ounce of heat. You never sweat because they are protecting the product. It's not that they're protecting us. They're protecting the product.
Yeah.
The listener is not supposed to care about and doesn't. The listener doesn't care about any of that. Just tell me about the game. And you can't do that in the world that you're describing when we have physical maladies, or we may have something else going on, or we have technical issues, or what. The good ones let us just worry about doing our job.
Very true. And this is my very favorite picture. For those that are listening on the podcast, it is an image of Brad in the broadcast booth, his broadcast booth, with his play-by-play boards and notes that he's taking down. And the reason that it's my favorite, Brad, is that it's kind of a snapshot into the window of what goes on in the mind of the play-by-play announcer, in the preparation and those types of things. And I know a lot of guys now are having their broadcast boards done weekly by a service. That's something I don't think I could ever do because
Me either.
Couldn't do
just stay on that shot for a minute, because I'm going to tell everybody something that I think's kind of in keeping with what you're trying to do. So when I started on the Cowboys broadcast, it was just one facet of my job, and I was the color analyst. Excuse me, haven't had enough coffee in the throat yet this morning. And it was 1976, and I was working with Vern Lundquist. So Vern, and I knew nothing. I knew less than nothing. So everything that I do came from Vern is the root of that tree. Everything I learned and tweaked and adapted. So Vern, instead of on the right, you see the manila folders with the colored tabs. And I just kind of came to that because it's light and easy. So this is what I'd like you to imagine that Vern did and carried around while he was the sports director at WFAA Channel 8 in Dallas, #1 sports guy in Dallas. He was doing Bowling for Dollars. He was doing ABC stuff. There he is. But so instead of that light manila folder with the sheets on it, Vern used and carried around in the suitcase that he carried a magnet board. So, and each, he had, the magnet board was divided just like this folder is divided. The top half is the offense and the bottom half is the defense. And that's just the way I do it because it works for me. There's no right or wrong way to do it. So what I'd like everyone to imagine is instead of this light manila folder, you've got a very heavy, not quite 8.5 by 11 size like that, but a little bit smaller, magnetized board. A big, I mean, it's like a big flat magnet.
Yeah.
And then he had the little magnet pieces that were kind of like from a Stratomatic football game. And I saw him do this. And he would, during the week, he would, at a typewriter, physically type all the information on each player onto a little Avery tab that would get put on one magnet. And he would then arrange those magnets the way I had that computer program laid out. And so you had to move the magnet pieces. The spotter had to move the magnet piece. And it had to weigh 25 pounds, and he carried that around, and that's how he did it.
And they didn't have rollers on the suitcases back then.
They did not. They explain Vern's back problems now. So that's what Vern did, and I got to do 2 games in 1979 while he was doing a boxing tournament in Japan, including the famous division clinching game against Washington that I did with Charlie Waters, who was injured that year. And then in 1984, I became the play-by-play announcer full-time when Vern was moved from college football to the NFL by CBS. And I determined pretty quickly that I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to carry around magnets and things, but I did a hand-drawn board. I was doing some work in the late 70s a couple of years after that, I don't remember what I used when I started. No, yes, I do. I beg your pardon. That was in '84. Back in about '78, I was doing some work for the CBS station in Dallas. I was doing the 10 o'clock and some other things, and I went to the art department, and I said, "This is what I need designed," and I kind of drew a picture of what he had, and so they came up with something on it that would be on a light cork board with push pins that I could hold the thing onto. And that's how I did the boards until sometime later. And I said, this is now that you've got the little foam board is flaking and, that stuff's all in your bag, and the push pins and then they're making holes. And so, So I said, well, maybe I could just do this on a 8.5 by 11 legal size sheet and put them on a folder like that. And I did them by hand. And then sometime in the late 80s, my then wife, who was always much smarter than me and still is, said, what if you did that on a computer? And I said, but I memorize what I need to know about names and numbers by the physical act of writing them in. And I don't know that if I did it on a computer that I would have that same learning ability. And she said, try it. So I did. And the first thing I noticed was that when I took my best writing work and put it side by side with the computer, I thought, my then 5-year-old son had done it. It looked ridiculous how much cleaner it was. And then I realized that she came up with an Excel program that she still tweaks for me to this day. And I then realized that if I did it that way, I didn't have to start every board over from scratch every week or every year, because you just save the program for the teams in the division, go back and make the 4 changes that you need to make, and you've just saved a bunch of time. And what I found out was that it did not deter my learning of the roster. And that's yours, I take it?
Yep, that is the one I use. It's done on Keynote out of Mac. And, just exactly what you're describing. So I'm able to keep that each week for, that's text. And then right. If they are playing conference, for example, I have the ones from last year, right, that I can bring up, and I'm just changing numbers, names, and stats, right?
Right. And in the NFL, before free agency, teams didn't change.
Yeah.
I mean, now at college, every 4 years, you're going to have a 50% turnover in the roster. Now put your tech board back up for just a second.
All right.
I'll bet you have had this conversation with our great mutual friend, Craig Way, who does the Texas games.
Mm-hmm.
So Craig uses something like what you're using, except his is much more, now it would never work for me, but Craig's is much more elaborate and color-coded. I mean, you've got black and red, which is great for the Red Raiders, and his is even more elaborate. Once upon a time, his son was doing it for him. I don't know if that's still the case, but it's an art project. And, it's a thing to behold, and there's way too much information. So Babe Laufenberg, my broadcast partner, has someone do his board for him, and there's Babe. And so it's about the size of mine, except blown up a little bigger, and he hand fills in his notes, but he's looking at different notes. He's looking at statistical trends and things, and I have figured out a system that for me tells me what I need to know. I like a clean look.
It's me too.
Distracting. And so what I will do is look at it, and I can see if it's a pro game, I can see how long the guy's been. His height and weight aren't that important. but I can see how many years he's been in the league. I have
Yep.
devised this system of notes that let me know what other teams he's been with, and has he been all pro, and has he been in the Pro Bowl, and that kind of thing. And for the play-by-play person's purposes, that's really all I need.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I do too. And a quick shot that I'm putting up on the screen from I think this might be your booth.
It might be, and you are training someone early. Is that your spot?
That's my younger son. My older son, who went to Tech for 5 years, was my spotter then, and now my younger is learning. And this is against Baylor when we did the shootout at AT&T, and you can see color-coded for Baylor on the other one. But the point,
yeah, right, you got it, yeah.
Yeah, but the point you're making is so valid. Everybody has their own style. Like I lay mine out so that it lays out like a lineup does when they come to the line of scrimmage. It's just the way I've always done it. You mentioned the tack, what did you call them? The pins.
Yeah,
the late great Jack Dale, who knew.
Yes.
Yes. He did it that way. So when I came into the booth for the first time after doing, after he was doing the broadcast for almost 50 years, right. Steve Pitts, mentioned him a little bit earlier, and John Harris, my color analyst, who's been with me the entire time and was with Jack prior.
Right.
They're like.
John, I said hi.
Absolutely. And so they actually handed me a replica of his board, and they go, here, this is what Jack used. You may want to think about using this. And I'm like, appreciate that. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Kind of have my own thing that I'm going to try to do. So
right. And that if there's anybody listening to us, any young broadcasters, and it can be in any sport, because I've used a variation of that same program, both for soccer and basketball, and I know a lot of guys who, when I did the Rangers for 3 years, I think the way that my then wife got the idea of computerizing the program was, I mentioned to her that some friends of mine who were doing, and still are, besides Eric Nadel, doing Major League Baseball, John Rooney, who is with the Cardinals now, I believe, has done the White Sox and the Twins and network baseball. And John had his scorebook on. He carried a little portable printer with him. He made out his lineup sheet on the computer every day, and then he threw it away. Well, I mean, I learned from my mother, but then I learned from Eric, and you don't throw it away. You keep the books for years.
Yes.
And but she said, you might think about doing your charts on computers. And like I said, at first I balked, and now I can't imagine how I didn't do it.
Well, funny that you mentioned that too. You probably can't see it right now, but back on one of my little whatever those are called, the cutouts in the wall that have some memorabilia in there, I actually have the it's the board that I used for what is the best game that I've ever done so far, which was Texas Tech in 2008. When Tech beat then number one Texas. I seem to want to remind people of that every time I do one of these. But, when you have your one, that's the one you keep going to. I'm curious, from your...
Let me just jump in and tell you that I have the only one I have. It's on that wall, so I'd have to move the whole rig. But
right.
The only chart that I have is from the game that Emmitt Smith broke the NFL rushing record.
Nice.
And he signed it for me.
Nice.
Across the front of that, and so that one lives on for me.
I think one of the things that is so cool about our jobs and just the passion of this is the access and the ability to, I have memorabilia from the days when I was working in television and covering the Cowboys that, you go into the locker room, you get to know these guys, and they'd be happy to sign something for you or for one of your family members or a charity that you're doing, etc. And just the collection that you come up with, people are like, man, how did you get this? Or where? It's just incredible. The access. It almost becomes, though, doesn't it, Brad? It almost becomes, it's second nature, and you don't want it to be. You still want it to be a wow factor. You still want it to be really cool because we're all still kids at heart, right, when we're doing this.
Yes, and that is candidly how I know that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, because I don't think that's learned. I think that's given, and I think that comes, for me, it comes from God. Everybody can have their own opinion, but I am more excited about my 43rd season than I have ever been. And I anticipate that I will be that way until they say you have to stop now. Yeah. And that's how I'm going to stop. When Bill Parcells was in his first year with the Cowboys, when he was with the Giants, Mike Wallace had done a 60 Minutes profile on him. I'm sure it was after they won a Super Bowl. So now, and they became friends. So now we're in Oxnard. And so that means it's 18 years ago, 03. And Wallace comes to Oxnard to do a profile on Parcells again. And I said, I got to meet the guy. And Bill said, sure. So he had me come over to the little area where Wallace was doing a sit down with him, and he introduced us. And that was an incredible honor for a broadcaster. And Bill said, as he was introducing me to the late Mike Wallace, he said, this guy wants to die at the mic. And I said to Bill, yeah, what's your point?
Well done. Well played. Which, and it is cool to hear that there are so many passionate people in the broadcast profession. But I'm curious, so you're one of my guys, okay? You mentioned Vern. Vern, I think, is one of both of our guys for sure. Tell me some of the other guys, some of the other people that you go, when I want to listen to somebody, when I want to, not emulate them, but kind of just pick up some points, or I just love to hear them. Who are some of the great broadcasters that you think about?
So those are different questions. The first ones, because I'm a Chicago native and I spent most of my early childhood and then summers in that area. So my all-time broadcast hero is Jack Brickhouse, the late Jack Brickhouse, who was the radio voice of the Bears and the television voice of both the Cubs and White Sox, and did some Bulls games. And he was, to me, it. The Cubs had radio announcers named Vince Lloyd, who came up through the WGN family tree. They had a station in Peoria where they trained announcers and brought them up to Chicago like a baseball farm system. And he did games on the radio with Lou Boudreau, who had been a great player and player manager. And the thing that I remember about listening to them, probably as a teenager, is they were having such a great time. Mm-hmm. And they would talk about the cigars they were smoking and the hot dogs. And you talked before, Brian, and I'm very flattered and grateful for your saying that I try to bring you into the entire stadium and see all. That's where I got it from. These guys, they made you taste the hot dogs. You could smell the cigars. You could hear whatever was going on. And they never let anything but the game be the most important. There was never any question that it was not. We weren't just dropping in on Vince and Lou, although it sounded that way. But the game was always the most important thing. Then a little bit later, by the time I was in high school and college, as a Midwestern kid, you heard KMOX in St. Louis everywhere. And then my guy was Jack Buck. And the reason Jack was that guy for me was much the same reason that Brickhouse was in Chicago, and that is that Jack Buck could do everything. And he did it. And it could be and he did this after he was well established as the Cardinals baseball announcer and a network baseball announcer. He did a game show on television. He did an afternoon radio talk show, and he did it all as smooth as silk. And so when I was seriously trying to get into the business by where I went to school and the things that I did, Jack Buck and Jack Brickhouse were who I wanted to be. I want to be the voice of sports in that town. Then I worked for Frank Gleber, the late Frank Gleber.
Oh, yeah. Great.
And most of the people who are listening to us now probably never heard Frank, and possibly never heard of him. Frank Gleber died at the age of 51, and he was a gifted, and I'm saying gifted, CBS television sportscaster. He did literally everything, and what I just described about Jack Buck, that was Frank Gleber. And Frank had the ability to do anything, literally from an NFL playoff game to an NCAA tournament basketball game to log rolling in Canada. I've watched all of those things and make it sound like he invented the sport. Now, because I worked with him, I saw how he worked, and so I learned from Frank how to figure out how to work more efficiently. Like when you start off, when I started doing Cowboys play-by-play and color with Vern, I insisted on memorizing every name and number on the chart. And I would do that with every college game I get. I had, well, as you go along, what you find out is that, good Lord, look at them.
Nice pants.
Yeah, thanks.
And he wasn't even doing bowling for dollars at that moment.
He probably wasn't. No. What you learn as you go along is that you need to know what you need to know. You don't literally need to know every single factoid about every single player on both teams, but you do need to know and be able to anticipate what's important. I, for instance, now will spend what some people would consider, Vern would probably, an inordinate amount of time on knowing the backup linemen, offensive linemen on the other team. And the reason that, and I've, the depth charts that the teams send you, they don't tell you anything. That's the PR guy had to put something down. It doesn't mean that's what the depth chart really is. Probably the same way in college stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
And what I learned is that what I don't want to have happen is somebody gets hurt and somebody pops in and plays a significant amount of time at a key position, winds up having a huge impact on the game, and because you weren't paying attention, he wasn't on your radar. I did a lot of Southwest Conference basketball and Big 12 basketball, and I for several years I worked with Reed Geddes, the great Houston guard, on Big 12 games. Loved working with Reed, and he and I were doing a game at A&M one day, and they had 3 or 4 guys injured, and so there was a guy who hadn't played. It was February. He hadn't played hardly any minutes, but I knew they had injuries, so I did a little more research on him than I normally would have done. He wound up playing more than half the game and playing a key role in the game, and I knew who he was. I didn't know everything about him, but I wasn't unprepared. Those are the little details that you learn. You learn how to work smart. So I learned that from Frank Gleber, and I'll tell you something else that I learned from Frank. Frank had a tumultuous personal life, but there was nothing more important to him than his kids. He did every event. He literally rubbed elbows with kings and princes of industry, and there was nothing that lit Frank Gleber's pilot light brighter than talking about the high school games of his 2 sons, his 2 youngest sons, Craig and Mitchell. Craig's still working for the Cowboys. Mitchell's now the president of the state fair. Nothing lit Frank Gleber up more than that. And I learned that from Frank. I learned the importance of keeping a balance. So then to get back to what you asked me about who do I listen to now, because I admit to bias to people that I like personally, but so because of my friendship with Jack Buck, I've become pretty good friends with Joe. Mm-hmm. And I really like the way Joe and Troy Aikman interact. Yeah. I like the way they approach the game. I like listening to them. The guy who I think on television was my favorite listen was Pat Summerall,
Oh yeah.
And I had the great privilege to know Pat and spend some time with him. And Pat did more with fewer words than probably anyone in the history of our business. And he copied Ray Scott, who, if you look at old film, and I mean film,
Yeah.
Green Bay games in the 60s from television, this is what you'd hear from Ray Scott. That's television, so you're looking at the picture.
Yeah.
And from Ray Scott, you would hear star, Dowling, touchdown. And that's what you'd hear.
Yeah.
And what you'd hear from Pat is Aikman, Irvin, touchdown.
Yeah.
And then John Madden would come in and fill up the notebook. But this is the key, and I've had the good fortune of doing considerable radio and television, and you know this because you've done the same thing. Poor Babe Laufenberg and everybody who has to work with me on the radio. I got to be all your senses. You know, I'm talking to, when I'm doing a game on the radio, whether it's a Cowboy game or the Cotton Bowl or anything else on the radio, I am talking to sightless people. I'm talking to truck drivers. I'm talking to people in duck blinds and people cleaning out their garage. You can't see everything. I have to see it for you. I have to smell it for you. You've got to see the colors vividly. Now, when you talk about guys who you listen to, for me, and again, one of my best friends, Eric Nadel, the radio voice of the Rangers, the Hall of Fame radio broadcaster of the Rangers, is better at the small details than anyone I've ever heard. And to me, the proof is that he tells you things that you don't even know he's telling you. But you see everything. And if you go back and listen, next time anyone listens to Eric doing a Ranger game, just listen. You'll know the color of the pitcher's glove and the angle at which he's holding it and the exact length of the sweatshirt under his uniform jersey and where the batter's pant legs are and the exact precise location of all of the infielders and outfielders. And he's not making a big production. He just weaves it in, and suddenly you realize you see everything. Eric, working with Eric for 3 years on the Ranger broadcast, was a tremendous teacher for me and remains that way. And then for other people that you like listening to now on radio, I'm partial to the people in Dallas, Fort Worth. Chuck Cooperstein, the longtime Mavericks radio voice, is a friend of mine. I hired him into the market. And if you could bottle Chuck's passion, you could light up a city. He is on fire for everything he does, and
the whole time.
And now he's a native New Yorker. I mean, I feel the same way for the most part, but he's a native New Yorker, so he's a little more excitable.
Yeah.
Every now and then, I would say to him when he first started with the Mavericks, I would say, just leave me some place to go in the fourth quarter, will you? Because you're starting off at 600 miles an hour. You're going to be fine. I'm going to run out of gas. And I think Craig Way does a great job of that.
Yeah, me too.
Again, these are guys who I worked with and am friends with. And then on the network level, I mentioned Joe and Troy. I really try to pay attention to the curse, as you know, Brian, is that we can't just sit and watch a game.
Yeah.
You know, we're critiquing everything from camera angles to what the announcers are doing.
Yes. And it's so funny you mentioned that, because my son and I literally will sit and watch some television broadcasts or listen to some radio as well. But there are catchphrases that people use that if you don't watch or listen to yourself after you've done a game, you may not catch up on the fact that you keep using the same phrase, right? And I don't mean the.
This is exactly why I listen to every game.
Exactly. And so we'll sit there and we'll go, okay, what's the over under on how many times this particular broadcaster is going to use the word outstanding? That's one of them. And we'll literally count it during the game. It's just become kind of a fun game for us, but at the same time, it's a reminder. It's a reminder that, hey, you got to pay attention to those kinds of things, because they do become an annoyance if you're not careful to the listener, right?
No question about it. I have a number of friends doing play-by-play of network television who I wish would talk less.
Yeah.
On television. Just let me watch the picture. And on television, the analyst is supposed to be the star. I think Kevin Burkhardt does a great job of that. Again, I've gotten to know Kevin, but I think he does a great job of that at Fox from a play-by-play point of view. He is not trying to show you what he knows. He's not trying to impress you with the fact that he's doing a network telecast. It's supposed to be relaxed, enjoy the game, and set up the analyst who's supposed to be the expert. Summerall, as I said before, is to me he's the standard, and there aren't many who fit the standard. But those are some of the people that I like listening to, and there are others. I don't want to slight anybody.
Has pronunciation ever been an issue for you? I know when I was calling a game, Nebraska against Tech, and Ndamukong Suh was their nose guard at the time, and I don't know why, but I practiced it before the game. I tried and tried and tried to get it right, and sure enough, as soon as he makes his first play, I completely butcher the name, and I just started calling him Sue because for the rest of the time, it kind of became a mental block for me.
The answer is, of course, yes. It's that way with all of us. I wear it as a kind of a badge of pride. And for some reason, I love the Polynesian names. I love the challenge of there was a tackle who I don't know if he went to TCU, Vitae.
Yes.
And did he not go to TCU?
Yes.
And
TCU
then
or Oklahoma State. There was one at each, I believe.
Yeah,
but I think you're right. TCU.
This guy played for Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And his first name, his last name is Vitai. It's pronounced Vitae. The first name was multi-syllabic, and I still can't say it. I still can't do it right. I tried, and everybody else would call him Big V, because that's what they called him. That's what his coaches called him. That's what his teammates called him. With the PR guys. That was like giving up. No, I will not call him. And then, of course, you mangle it. Then you mangle it a few times, and then but I will not call him Big V. I'll call him Vitae. And literally, at the Cowboys OTAs and minicamp in the last couple of weeks, Babe and I were sitting next to each other, looking at this is where you start learning the team. And with the pronunciation of the new players, and just say the name out loud. Say the name. Yeah. Say the name. So yes, the answer is yes. Of course, pronunciations bedevil all of us, but I see that as a challenge, and I embrace it.
Well, it is, and I like the fact that you say that, because it makes me feel better. But the reality is, you do find those throughout a season, and so yeah. I've called guys Chuck. I've called them, whatever it is I can come up with. And invariably, it's going to be a guy that's going to make a bunch of plays. Right?
Sure, and then what you do is when you get if it's a team you haven't seen yet this year, and you get the depth chart, and you look at them, and there are 6 of those names. Yeah. And the first thing you do is say out loud every curse word you ever knew. and then you look at them and you say, I hate your team. I hope you lose every game. And then you try to learn the names.
Now, in the fact that there are not only people, but there are events, there are things that have happened. When you and I talked prior to setting this up, I said to you, I want to think about stories, blah, blah, blah. He goes, well, make sure you ask me about a certain soccer game in Mexico Boy, did that I just laid it right out there, softball. I'm throwing it up there, hit it out of the park.
Yeah, so it's probably 1972 or 3, and I'm working for a radio station that no longer exists, although the frequency does, WRR AM, which was on 1310, and I was hired as a news reporter and wormed my way into sports, which was what I wanted to do, and nobody listened, so they didn't care what they put on. And one of the things that we did was carry Dallas Tornado soccer games. And I worked then with Norm Hitzges, an iconic Dallas radio personality. And he and I did the soccer games together. So they're playing. There is Lamar Hunt, may he rest in peace, such a sweet gentleman. Always said nicest billionaire you'll ever meet. Lamar owned the Tornado and was really the money behind the North American Soccer League. So there's a game where the U.S. men's national team is going to Monterrey, Mexico in the early 70s. Like I said, it's probably 73. And playing an exhibition game against the Mexican national team. And because we're carrying the Dallas Tornado, we're going to carry it. So Lamar takes a few media people on his plane. So we fly on his plane, middle of summer, hot as blazes. And we land in Monterey and we go have a lovely dinner, early afternoon. And so now we're going to go to the stadium and do the U.S. And Kyle Rote Jr., who is still a very dear friend, was the Dallas star who was playing for the U.S. So now we're going to do U.S.-Mexico. And we go to the stadium, and a big cavernous stadium in Monterey, but old. And so we get up to the booth, which is not like it's more like a suite. There are no dividers. But we got the table space, and we're going to sit there and do the game. And we have no telephone lines. We have no telephone. So this is, ladies and gentlemen, this is 1973. There are no cables. There's no cell phones. Cell phones. What about cell phones? Playoffs. There's no cables of any kind. There's no satellites. There are telephone wires. Everything you do is through a telephone line. And you are literally going to do this. You're going to take the telephone, you're going to unscrew the mouthpiece in your bag of equipment, which I was carrying.
Bag of tricks. You
have a little mixer made by the company Shure, S-H-U-R-E, it's a Shure mixer. We all had it. And you plug your microphones into the back of it, and there's a cable that runs from the back of that mixer and attaches to the phone line by means of alligator clips, which are called alligator clips because the little jaws, they're like battery leads for a car.
Used for other things too, but
yeah. So So you're going to unscrew the mouthpiece, and you're going to attach the alligator clips to the little leads in the phone, and that's how the broadcast is getting back to your station, through that phone line. So suffice to say, absent a phone line, you're really just talking to yourself, okay? So we're in Mexico, and we have no telephones, and there's nobody there. And it's me and Norm and Temple Pouncey, the great sports writer from the Dallas Morning News, wrote soccer and tennis and track. And now the only people in this booth or visible anywhere are the janitors who are cleaning up the booth, getting it ready for the people who are going to be coming in there later. And so I am in my 20s and completely hair on fire, freaking out. I've got a broadcast I got to put on. I've got no way to put it on. Telefono, how am I going to do this? But I have no one to ask. Temple knew just enough Spanish to find, and somewhere in a hallway, he encountered a doctor who either was from Dallas or had lived in Dallas and was bilingual. And Temple was able to convey to him that we had a problem. We didn't know who to contact. Who do you talk to when you have no telephone? And so he helped. Now we're getting closer to kickoff. Mm-hmm. And people are coming into this booth, fans, and there's going to be another broadcast, for some reason it feels to me like, and it probably was an Italian language broadcast, like 3 seats over, no divider. And there was a Spanish language broadcast 3 seats down that way, and fans sitting in this suite. And I still have no phone line. And Norm is walking around with a roster, and he's stopping the janitors asking, and he can't speak a lick of Spanish. And Norm is trying to get from a scouting report from the janitor, sweeping up the place. And Norm would point to a name on the roster and say, goal. And he tried so many different ways to communicate with and finally I just lost it, and I screamed at him, and I said, Norm, it doesn't matter. We don't have a phone line. We're talking to each other. I'm not entirely sure how, but somehow that Temple Pouncey related to the doctor who related to someone else who got a hold of the phone company. I'm not kidding. They lined up for the national anthems. They played the national anthems. They were about to kick off, and over the top of the booth and down through the open window were being handed telephones. Wow. And only one at first. So I have no backup to call the station and see if but I got one. And as the game is starting, it's coming in. I put it on the desk. I unscrew the phone. I attach the alligator clips. Boom. Let's hope and pray and start broadcasting. And it all worked. And then throughout the evening, I told you there were fans in this suite. Well, they're having a good time. And Mexico either scored or had a good rush. And people are offering us beer and Cabrito. Of course, we're taking it. And we're getting it poured on us. It was classic. You cannot come up with a better example of what can go wrong, and then somehow magically it works anyway.
That is spectacular. No wonder you threw that out there. Make sure you ask about that soccer game. Man, that is now I got to ask you about one last thing. And it's because while I was researching, I noticed something that I'm not positive you've seen this yet, so I want to get your reaction. Okay, now, not the book. We know the book's out there. This is another thing you and I have in common. We've both written a Cowboys book. Yours there. Mine was called Where Have All Our Cowboys Gone? But here is what I wanted to ask you about while I was researching. I pulled up Amazon, and if you could see this, look, those of you that are listening on the podcast, it was... No.
Oh, 88.
Look at the bottom. 18. Yeah. Apparently, you were around to write this in 1888.
I am veteran. I am not quite that veteran. The amazing thing is also, it went out of print. This publisher they did this Stadium Stories series, and they had like 6 or 8 college teams and a half a dozen pro teams. And they were hiring someone who'd been in the market for a while. I think I wrote that in 2003.
Oh, so it wasn't 1888.
It was not 1888, in fact, although it felt like I'd started it then. But I will tell you, one of the great things that I got from that was they said, just make it like 10 or 12 stories that don't have to be connected to each other, except that they're about the Cowboys. So I could pick. So I picked one about Tex Schramm. And the chapter on Tex, I actually spent a day with him, and I'd known him since the 70s, so for 30 years. And I spent a day with him just a few months before he passed away. Well, Tex told me things I'd never heard. They're all in the book. And he told me things about Tom Landry's leaving and wanting to leave before he left, and there are things that I had never heard. I did a chapter on Cliff Harris and Charlie Waters. I did a chapter on how hard it is to play quarterback for the Cowboys, and from that chapter, interviewing Aikman and separately Smith and Irvin, all three of them independently said to me, the game that we're proudest of is the championship game that we lost after the 94 season, because we got so far behind in San Francisco in the mud, and then we came back and almost won. But that showed the real character of our team. And so I said, okay, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I think I've got another chapter here. And so that's the best loss. And I wrote one on the best and worst draft choices at that point in franchise history. And it was a lot of fun to write, and it was really an eye-opener to find out how hard it is to write a book.
Yes.
But I love the research in that case, because I'm talking to people that I'd known for a very long time. And so it felt like I started in 1888, but
Well, and I mentioned that now here is a shameless self-promotion plug right here. So
you're entitled.
Here's my Cowboy product, and it was, now talk about, have you ever heard the phrase timing is everything?
Yes,
of course.
I have.
So this book was written and actually released September 10th, 2001.
Oh my!
Yeah.
And did anything else happen?
Maybe the next day. So I had like the best opening day, the best debut event down in Beaumont. Lines were out of the shopping center that we were doing the book signing at. The next morning, I get the phone call that everybody got if they weren't watching at the time. Hey, you better rent a car and get the heck home. And that's exactly what I did when September 11th hit. And then, of course, a good month goes by before anybody's doing anything that is that's worth anything in a grain. And you mentioned Ron Chapman. The great Ron Chapman had me on his program to kind of re-release it here in Dallas a month later. And anyway, it was a lot of fun to write. You mentioned the research of it. I had such a great time talking to all these great players that I grew up watching, finding out what they did after football, and it was just it was a love affair, a lot of fun. But man, you mentioned the work that goes into writing. I have so much respect for writers that put these things out on a regular basis, because it's a chore.
Yeah, it's. I mean, you and I will never know what it's like giving birth, but I can. I know that's a lot harder, but this might be as close as someone gets. I mean, it's because you just do all of this laborious minutia that has to be done to get to the finished product. And then when you're done, I think the first thing you feel before you feel the joy is you feel just relief.
Yeah.
And but it was a great experience, and I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to do it.
It's kind of like the research before a podcast. So
yeah.
And I got to tell you.
And by the way, and I'll tell you, I said at the beginning that I like this more than I ever have, and people think, oh gosh, that's and it's not just the games though. This is how I know I'm doing the right thing, Brian. And I know you experience the same thing. And this happens, I believe this happens when you're really passionate about what you're doing. And the further along you go, and you know that there's more behind you than in front of you. And so hopefully your gratitude grows. And so it's a job. And every job has things that you hate. And I tell people I love this job so much, I love what I hate. And awesome. the parts of it that are really just kind of slogging through the mud, that's what you have to do to get you ready to walk into the booth on game day and feel ready for whatever happens. And I love that whole process. I love everything about it.
Man, that is so well put. Brad, this has been awesome. We could talk, I don't know about you, I could talk with you for hours. Sure. This has just been fantastic. I so appreciate your time. I know how many things you're involved in right now, and time's tough sometimes. So thank you for taking the time out, and I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Great to be with you. Appreciate being asked.
All right. Thank you so much. Again, Brad Sham, one of the guys that I consider the guys in play-by-play. So thrilled to have him on Broadcast Booth. Quick reminder that you can get access to what we're talking about from Broadcast Booth in many different ways. You see that on your screen there. If you're in the podcast, it's on all of the social media channels. If you're not on the podcast and you're watching this, you can, of course, pick up the podcast anywhere that you subscribe to your particular podcast. But that is this episode of Broadcast Booth. Look forward to speaking with you and hope you listen again the next time around. We'll have another great special guest coming up next.